Hello, everyone. Welcome to Meticulous Talks on September 28th, 2024. I am Chris Accords.
I'm Hifrock.
How you doing, Hithrock?
I feel the drought coming.
Hmm. Yeah, got a couple months. What? Well, wait. Yeah, Ciderfest is like end of November, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So,
No, it's 1st of November.
oh, okay.
So a month.
A month. That's not bad. Although, yeah, we've come through September, coasted off the edge of Everfree results. Got a couple streams to fill with stuff.
But it does sound like we're gonna have just one stream more before Ciderfest, right?
Yeah, I guess you get that out of the way straight away. 2 weeks from now, weekend is Canadian Thanksgiving, October 12th to 14th or so. So we are both going to be. Well, I'm going to be visiting family. I assume you are. Have something else planned?
Nope.
Well,
I guess I'll just be chilling with friends.
otherwise indisposed. Yeah, so there won't be a stream that weekend, and so we will be. I guess what is that? October 26th be the next Meticulous Talks stream after this one. So yeah, only one in the month of October.
Which is right a week before Ciderfest.
Oh, well, plenty of time to perhaps preview or yeah, well, we'll see. Uh, so anyway, as far as this stream goes, we need to, as I say, fill in the time with something. So I thought it's been like we've done. I'm pretty sure we had done a stream about Tia at some point in the past. Probably when I first came up with it. And arguably, you could say the stream about like archetype stuff was also vaguely related. But a lot has changed in the system since I first came up with it. So, figured, yeah, explain a little bit. Perhaps poke some holes in it. Have some thoughts for future changes to make, as well as maybe commit publicly to some future plans that I have pressure to actually finish them.
Did you know that's actually a little fallacy? Sometimes revealing things you're doing gives you less motivation to actually finish them. And that is because you get the uh, gratification of like telling people about it without actually doing
Hmm.
it. Not to. Okay, we're canceling the stream now, Chris.
It's I mean, we'll see. It's not like these are new plans. I've been thinking about this stuff for years, honestly, already. So I hope it should work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and these are modifications to an existing system that'll make it better, hopefully. So I'm gonna go ahead as planned and see.
Yeah.
It'll be a data point regardless, which is the important thing. A data point in favor of whether telling people about it early was wrong or not. So it's probably going to be me talking most in this stream. If you have questions, of course, please feel free to jump in. If there's anything that I learned from kind of putting the notes together for this stream, is that there's a lot of room to be more mathematically rigorous in the way that Tia is put together. So yeah, I'm glad to take suggestions.
That goes for the chat as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna do my best to have this not be just a stats lecture.
I would not mind that, honestly.
Well,
I don't know. I don't know if the viewers would, but I would not.
I guess. Okay, yeah, you can erase. Yeah, so I have this slide here. Just is just going to be a whiteboard. Um, to hopefully help. Oops, no, I thought I selected eraser. Erase all. There we go. Okay. Visualize some things when we need to, if we need to. All right. So, I guess we should start with kind of the impetus, the reason why we decided to do any of this. It was 2019 when I got started. I guess probably late 2018 because it was Vancouver 2019 was the first tournament that got put into the system. So probably late 2018, early 2019. I don't remember honestly. That was 5 years ago. And I was like just starting to really get into statistics in that time, and looking into like ELO ratings for sports teams and modeling of like chess ratings and stuff like that. And I thought that maybe there was a niche to be explored in doing something like that for CCG. Um, and coming up with a system that could kind of stack up different decks, and give you a sense of their relative strength. Because you could just look at win rates, but win rates can be a little bit deceptive sometimes if you get like some decks are stronger than others. If a deck wins a lot against weaker decks, those will all be wins, but they won't. Those wins don't mean as much as wins against other strong decks. You would think, at least. So that was the sort of concept, was to similar to what tournaments do with the strength of schedule tiebreaker. TIA is like measuring strength of schedule, but over the entire game rather than just a single tournament.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so that started in 2019, and since then, every game that's been played with at least like not casually has gone into the database. So that's Harmony. At the time, it was just Harmony, and then Core started, and Adventure, and we rotated it for each of the cores. Went back and changed stuff when stuff got banned. I think I do have a Popper spreadsheet hanging around somewhere for when that became an official format, but there was no, there was never enough data to actually start doing the math.
Yeah, I think it didn't really take off.
Yeah, it's always been like when someone decides to do it, people build in it for a little while, and then the tournament's over and everyone goes back to Core or Adventure or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so with that out of the way, we can talk a little bit about how the system works. So to start with, to start with, we have tournament results come in from, these days, usually it's copied straight off of Reddit. I mean, that's always been the case, I guess. Even back then, they came out of Reddit, usually. And the first step that the system needs to do is it needs to take those deck lists and distill them into categories or archetypes, as we say. Maybe I'll write that down. It's always hard with a mouse. Penmanship's going to be terrible. Let's just go Archie. And that is a whole matter of its own. We can talk about that later. I've got a section at the end for challenges with the system. The idea behind the archetypes was to capture this concept that there are sort of iterations of the same deck, right? You build your aggro deck one way, and then next turn you make some tweaks to it. Next turn you make some tweaks to it, right? There's iterations of the same basic idea, and those should all get counted together because they're the same sort of line of development, as it were.
Yeah,
was the original thought, and there's a whole conversation to be had about where you place the boundaries and what exactly this whole business is meant to represent. But
I think this is called Ship of Theseus.
Pretty much, yeah.
At which point a deck becomes another deck.
Yeah. So anyway, just from the 10,000 foot overview, once we go through that process, we have now a set of archetypes and also the results. So the next thing that comes in are these weights, which for historical reasons I've always assigned an L as the value as the variable that gets used for weights, but it's weights. Now weights are based purely on a deck's win rate, or percentage, I suppose you could say. So they're built so that they go in a range from 0.5 up to 1.5. Oops. Well, yeah, 1.5. Where 1 is the sort of average. The idea is that 1 is the average deck, or the average strength deck. A deck that has a 50% win rate, shall we say. And this is actually something that I know I need to change, because I made a change to the algorithm at some point, and this assumption that 1 is 50% actually doesn't hold anymore, and that's something I'm looking into. So that's another its own bug.
Why specifically this range? Why 0.5 to 1.5? Why not 0 to 2 or 0 to 1?
So the idea is, like, when a deck wins, it needs to gain Tia. When a deck loses, it needs to lose Tia, right? So let's see. If you wanted to do, and I think, like, when I think about it, like, say we did like your 0 to 1 suggestion, 0 to 1, then you would say probably that a deck's sort of L positive is that number, and its sort of L negative is just the inverse of that number, right?
Sure.
So the implication would be that if you beat a deck, you get its L positive number in Tia points. If you lose to that deck, you get. Well, no, that doesn't work. That doesn't work because okay. A little bit of math, right? If let me do a full eraser here. I actually did draw this out a little while ago. If we have two decks, one has a low W, and one has a high W.
W?
Or wait, L, whatever.
L, okay. So let's say 0 and 1. You have a deck with a 0 and a deck with like extremes, right?
Yeah.
And deck with a 1.
Yeah. You want, if the 0 deck wins, it should get a big payout. If the 1 deck loses, it should lose a lot, right?
Sure.
And the inverse is true. If the 1 deck wins, it should get only a little bit. And if the 0 deck loses, it should lose only a little bit, because that's sort of the sort of system expected outcome, right?
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. So if our range is from 0 to 1, then, like, I guess, well, the thought with the range from 0.5 to 1.5 was that when you beat a deck, you get that number, and then the inverse is like 2 minus that number.
Yeah.
Now, I understand, yeah, if you go from 0 to 1, you could do just 1 minus that number, and it would work the same way, right?
Yeah, you would just have, like, the absolute numbers would be different, but the scale would be the same, right? With the exception of a 0 deck, winning against an absolute 0 deck would always give you nothing because it's 0. But that's fine. Maybe.
Well, I don't know if that's fine per se. Like, yeah, so 0.5 to
If
1.
you win against a deck that always loses, did we really gain any new information?
I think so.
But
Like,
the deck always loses, like you will always win again, no matter.
okay, I
That's what
mean,
0 means,
if we're
right?
talking about, yeah, if we're talking about a mathematical ideal, right, then sure. But a deck that has no wins in the database doesn't, like,
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's okay. I got it. Yeah,
yeah.
I agree.
So yeah, I think,
So a deck that is a 0 on win rate is not necessarily an always 0 win rate deck. It's like if we have infinite data, 0 decks might not even exist, right?
yeah, yeah,
But we don't have infinite data, and some decks are zeros, even though with infinite data they would not be. Okay, I get it.
yeah. And so yeah, this is it. To return to your original question, the 0.5 to 1.5 is centered on 1. Um, so yeah, like the average decks always come out that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And even if you beat a nothing deck, you still get 0.5.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could make arguments in favor of ranging it from like 0.1 as the floor, or something like that. But yeah, the floor should be a number.
Non-zero, yeah.
Um, yeah. So yeah, I guess I already covered that. There's the kind of the L positive, which is your number from 0.5 up to 1.5. That's an arrow, not minus sign. And then your L minus is it's calculated as sort of, oh boy,
You
2.
should have gotten a tablet just for this stream.
Yeah, maybe I should have. Yeah, 2 minus L plus is what it works out to. So if your L minus is 0.75, if your L plus is 0.75, your L minus is going to be 1.25.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so that way, for each matchup that we have in a tournament, the deck that wins gets the L plus of its opponent, and the deck that loses the L minus of its opponent.
Could it not get its own L plus and L minus just inverse? Well, it's the same number, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, you can continue.
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, that is essentially the heart of the system. That is the whole idea. And then so over each given tournament, each deck kind of gets all their individual matches totaled up, and that turns into the sort of TIA column, and that goes into a separate spreadsheet because there's a time delay function that's applied to individual tournament results. The system basically counts more recent results as having more weight. Sorry, the word weight is going to get used a lot. I hope it's context. You can tell from the context what I'm talking about. But yeah, more recent results kind of count for more than older results do.
So I have a question. I can't answer it from the top of my head, but maybe you know the answer. let's say within one tournament, right? You're calculating tier. Is the order of matches you input matters for the end result with this system or not?
So with this system, it doesn't. But that is one of the things I want to do at some point. Because realistically, you should be recomputing the L's every round. Because that's a,
Should you?
I mean, it's a data point that can be talked about for the deck, right?
Because like if you have two matches for a deck and like if the order of input changes the score, that's kind of weird, I think. Because like a matchup is a matchup. It doesn't matter which matchup I did first, right?
Hmm. I mean, that's true. I guess my thought is that like having having done your round one match, like that result happened,
Mm-hmm.
and so the system should be able to use it to get a better idea of whether or not maybe you actually are favored in this second match that's happening.
Okay, but then like if I happen to get the second matchup first and the first second, the deck that I played against might get more points because of that. Or lose less points.
I guess so. Yeah.
Which now like your points depend on the input and on the order of the input. So what does like you might get if you like extrapolate it a little bit. My hobby is extrapolating. Uh, you might get like wildly different results based on the order of input, right? If yeah, but if the current system is order independent, I think I like that. So
Yep. I'm gonna write that down. Like, yes, yeah, the current system is order independent. The numbers are static. They're computed at the
yeah,
start of the tournament, and then just
the
kind
only
of
like ordering
enter.
comes from the time function that you said, right? That the recent results are favored,
Yeah,
but otherwise order. Okay, that's yeah,
yeah,
I
and I
think that's
guess
reasonable.
yeah, just to explain that in detail. Basically, like the last 10 results in a given format are tracked, and each one it's a linear decay. So the second most recent is only given 90% of its weight, and then 80% and 70% and so on down the line, until eventually it rotates out the far end.
Yeah.
And that's another matter, like whether you should use an exponential decay or there are various curves you could throw on that. But right now it's linear.
Okay.
Um, Maybe I should just like for anyone who doesn't know those math words, we're talking about like this versus kind of something like this, maybe.
It essentially changes how fast the older results drop off. If you
Yeah.
have linear, then a result from a year ago is like uh is like a result from difference between a result from now and a year ago is the same as a difference from result a year ago and 2 years ago. And if it was like exponential, it would like half every year, for example.
Yeah.
So the difference between like old results becomes less drastic with exponential, but I think right. Uh,
Hmm.
but the current results are way more relevant.
Yeah. Which actually, like, I think that might be right now that I think about it. Because, like, the thing is, um, we don't have that many results, frankly, right?
Yeah,
If the window is 10, if the window is 10, 10 tournaments, it's not actually been that uncommon in the course of doing this for, like, last year's Everfree to be in the system at the same time as this year's Everfree, right? Which is a little weird, right? So maybe exponential actually does make sense.
well, I think another thing like so normally last year's Everfree would be fine, right? The only difference that happened is we got like two set releases since then. So maybe that's the cutoff point. You should weigh results from the most recent set release more than the rest of the results.
Right. Possibly. Well, so there's like set results aren't the only thing. There's also ban list adjustments to take into account.
That's
But
like that's
yeah,
what I
yeah,
meant.
yeah.
Game updates.
You could call changes to the OCR.
Game updates. That's what Sim calls it. So
Sure. Yeah,
every set
that's
release and every ban list always comes with a game update document. So basically, yeah, you use game update documents as your versioning of the game essentially. Although then, like, if like the bans are insignificant, well, that never happens. But
yeah.
like, if the change is insignificant, do you consider that a different meta? Uh, you could just say a hard no, like every update is a different meta, which will be accurate enough. But a question is like, it is a question to ask as well, right? But are all of the updates significant?
Yeah. I mean, we can talk a little bit about like what I actually do when cards get banned now, because that's a little bit instructive. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the policy has been that when a card gets banned, I essentially go look at every deck that includes that card, and I delete all of the results for those decks. So like if there is a archetype, quote unquote, where some of the decks have that card in it and some of them don't, then you end up with kind of a partial result remaining. Where like that archetype's win rate might go from 25 and 10 to like 5 and 7 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
um and that those old results are allowed to like still stand on their own, but all the stuff with the ban card goes away. um and I guess like given that, I think it probably would be best to keep the results after a game update, but apply some kind of step function to their weights, right? Kind of similar to what you said, right? Like we go with kind of a smooth decay as long as the game doesn't change, but then when there's a game update, then there's like a step down.
Yeah. Because like I think game updates are the points when the meta changes usually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's that, but then there's also like as we just saw, right? Everyone was expecting core to be something, and then suddenly people discovered Counter Logic Factory, and now the meta is totally different, right?
Yeah.
Like
But I
like
mean,
major tournaments can change the meta too.
they can, yeah. I'm not saying to go away from your like current decay to. I think like I'm saying to use buff.
Yeah, yeah, and for what it's worth, that is a common theme across statistical modeling in basically everything. Is it like the more different factors you can bring in, the better, and then you just find some way to like blend them together. So yeah, like having a decay factor based purely on time, or well, sorry, not time, tournaments, and another one based on game updates, and then kind of just mushing them together into some sort of function. Yeah, that makes sense. Just making notes on my pad here. So, what I've said already is basically the entirety of the core algorithm. Um, there are some little things that get added onto it. Sort of little modules that run to fill in missing data mostly. But that is the core of it. Do the archetype sorting, We assign the L numbers. We give points or take away points based on match results, and then we do the time decay. And when I post the TIA updates, that number goes next to the deck. That is the outcome of that whole process.
So far, like I know you have a lot of thoughts about like how it could be improved and so on. But generally, was it giving results that make sense?
Yes. So like we can talk about like a bunch of different ways to calibrate whether the model makes sense, right? Like you could say
Yeah.
something like, when cards get banned, do the decks that include them have anomalously high TIA scores, right? I think that would be a reasonable question to ask.
That is one of the questions you could ask. I don't know, like sometimes card gets banned before we get a chance to see them in action.
Sure. Oh, okay, sure. That's fair. Um, like,
But that's one of the data points you could have, yes.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess that's the proper sort of response to the question, right? Is that like you can ask sort of, does the system feel like it's working, or you can sort of define some actual heuristics to calibrate whether it.
No, I was mostly going like vibes based, right? Like, do you feel like it's working? I don't think we can define any. If we can define any sort of heuristic to see if it's working, then we should be using that heuristic to define the system. Like,
Hmm.
right? Whatever definition you might give, you might as well use it then. So that's why, like, I think it's more like my question was more vibes based.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Fair point. Um, so overall, the problem that we have with this game, which is not a problem with the game per se, it's just a fact of reality, um, is that as far as statistics goes, we don't actually have a whole lot of data to work. Um, like there aren't actually that many games played. Certainly not when you compare to sort of like some of the systems I was modeling off of, like websites that pull in databases from like Magic Arena or Hearthstone, right? Where you have thousands and thousands of games
Yeah.
to look at. Um, yeah, we're looking at the sort of dozens, couple hundred, right? In this game. Um,
Yeah, but like, isn't that the magic of statistics where you are trying to get results out of the whatever data you have? Like, if you have all the data in the world, yeah, it's easy. But
well,
like, a
like
lot of it comes down to like, okay, you actually don't have all of the data.
yeah, but the issue is that like the the less data you have, the more like when you try to drill down into it, eventually you hit a floor where you're just looking at noise. And the less
Yeah.
data you have, the higher that floor is. Um, so like, any thoughts about advanced stats about like, you know, archetypes and how individual matchups fare. Now we're looking at like just a couple dozen games, and like you can't really say anything reasonable about it. Um, so I would say that I was originally a little bit overly ambitious in terms of how kind of precise and how much stuff I wanted to put in here. And it hasn't, like, yeah, there just isn't quite enough data to be able to say some of the things I wanted to say to start with. Um, However, like, actually, for example, when I first started, I would report the top 10 decks of every format. Um, but the bottom like 7 to 10, you know, sorry, 7 through 10, the ranks were usually like decks with negative scores, and like it was effectively random. There were tiebreakers going on that were like invisible basically to people looking at the scores. It just kind of looked like a random assortment of decks that you wouldn't consider properly
Mm-hmm.
dominant, right? And so I went to top five after that. Um, so like yeah, there were some changes. I think in its current form, it tends to be a good capture of what's what's actually around. Yes. Like generally speaking, whatever did well at the most recent tournament kind of floats to the top. But sometimes you have, like in particular, something's been doing very well in sort of online cons and cocos or whatever. Um, it might also be, just hanging around there, third, fourth, or whatever, and make sure people don't forget about it. Um, that is, I guess, another big challenge that we have with this game is that, for the most part, I guess this is something that I've seen, people don't stick with decks for very long. Um,
I I think that's, well, it depends how you, yeah. But I think a lot of people in this community like to build their own decks and what they like. Yeah, like that's my general impression.
yeah,
Not that there's like a stigma against neck decking here or anything. No, not at all. It's just the community is small enough. I feel like, and like I is just everyone here is a deck builder
yeah,
of some sort.
yeah. Like,
Not everyone, but like it's hugely out of proportion compared to any other card game out there.
mhm. Like, yeah, we definitely have examples of um, decks and players who kind of come back. It was Sokol with his Seleno thing, Joking Luna with with the Changelings and with his Alicorns, and um, Prism Light's actually here with various orange things. Right? There's that, but like certainly as far as the top decks go, usually if a deck sticks around for like 3 or 4 tournaments, it probably gets banned at some point. Like that's actually
Yeah,
how it's been almost. And every new tournament, someone brings something fresh, um, and it kind of we have to start all over again, right? Well, not all over again, but
yeah,
I
yeah. That
guess
makes sense.
yeah. To answer your sort of vibes question, what that means is that the top five spots in the TIA tend to be just like whatever won the last tournament, whatever came second in the last tournament, and then like maybe there will be Pancakes farm deck he's been working on all year will be like third or fourth, um, and yeah, a couple other ones in there.
Yeah, but this is like what I meant. Like during your explanation here, you like mentioned a bunch of names, and that's what I mean. People usually do their own thing, right?
Yeah,
It's not like there is like a list of meta decks and people like go pick one of them. Sometimes they do, but you most don't.
yeah. For the most part, like even going into continentals, and granted this year was different because there'd just been a set rotation, so
Yeah,
everybody was making from whole cloth. Um, but yeah, like even before the major tournaments, you can expect most people to show up with something they cooked up themselves.
yeah. So I know we kind of talked about it before, like just me and you, but I wanted to bring this topic up on stream. I know Tia does not account for the player who plays the deck, right? It just looks at the pure decks. But obviously, not everyone will play a deck the same way, and a deck might have different results in different hands.
Yeah, yeah. So player tracking is something that I have wanted to do for a while, and thanks to your encouragement, I am starting to do it behind the scenes. I have numbers computed for the current core. No, the current core and the most recent core. That's right. But there's still like the second core and the first core and harmony and adventure. And as I kind of mentioned to you, when I first started doing this back in the harmony days, I didn't even write down who played what. So I'm gonna have to do some digging through Reddit to find those old results and such.
You should really like compile all of the data into some parsable format.
Well, I mean, technically, it's all in a spreadsheet.
Yeah, that's parsable. That's like parsable compared to Reddit posts, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and so that is the major thing that I've been trying to do for a long time is have this all be in an API somewhere, and so that you can just ask. Well, yeah, you can just send a GET request. What's Grandpa's total win rate? Oh, there you go. Boom. There's the numbers. What is the and so you can turn these sort of statistical queries into requests to an API.
Yeah.
And then in principle, pie in the sky hope. But in principle, there could be like just a button over in Inti's event reporter. It's like, oh, export results to TIA, bam, and it just goes and does all the stuff for me. That's a long ways in the future, but that's one of the thoughts.
Yeah. I kind of want to just at least have, a place where I could look up tournament, like just search for a tournament name or a deck and see like, oh, this deck appeared in this tournament, or this tournament had these people.
Mm-hmm.
Because Reddit is not a very good place for that. It's really hard to search on Reddit. Like try searching for
Oh no, it's terrible. I know.
yeah, like a specific core Coco.
Usually I will look at like the posts that the sim account has made, and then
Scroll down.
scroll.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's one way of doing it. But yeah,
yeah. Or well, I mean, actually, what I would do probably is just ask Ara for the results, and he would maybe give them to me. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, we covered that. Plan for the future. I mean, there's a formative version of the code somewhere. Maybe I'll share it with you, and you can help me get the API off the line.
maybe.
So yeah, and yeah, you had mentioned players. As I said, that's something that I'm working on. There is, as you say, we talked about it. As I was going, I was also kind of trying to sort through which archetypes players played. That's a whole other matter, which maybe we, yeah,
Yeah, because every player is gonna have different affinity to a certain archetype.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I might not be as good at aggro as I am at control. Not that I'm good at control, but certainly more comfortable with one archetype than the other one.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's an interest, at least a passing interest, perhaps, yeah, to see those affinities for certain players, especially some of the more prolific players we've had through the years of this event or game. But well, yeah, archetype sorting is its own whole thing. Especially when I first started doing Tia, I was really bad at it. I had this sort of concept. It's like, oh, it's to have troublemakers in it because it's either a farm deck or a control deck. If not, if it's not clearly an aggro deck, just throw it in mid range. Yeah, it was not good. Um, so that's another bit of data that needs to get refined at some.
It is hard to classify decks. Like, it's easy to have types, but the real world is messy.
Yeah, like
And
I've been thinking, given what we just had the conversation for the ratings this year, that apparently each card has a designed purpose, right? Like,
Mhm.
you should be able to, I guess, ask Sim for every card that they ever built. Is that an aggro card? Is that a control card? Etc. Etc. Um, then you should be able to use that information as a sort of source of truth to kind of talk about decks, at least in terms of not into categories, but at least you can talk about like, oh, this deck has a lot of aggro cards in it. Maybe it's an aggro deck or something like that. You can create like a histogram of the cards in the deck and sort of their affinities.
Yeah, I think that could be used as a guidance, but not the ultimate truth.
Oh no, yeah,
Sure.
yeah. The ultimate truth is always going to be kind of a human choice. Either,
Yeah.
well, I suppose in principle we could, because I've actually been doing some data science learning at work. In principle, you could go and try to do a regression analysis and like maybe get an AI to do the sorting for you. Um, but in lieu of that,
When will AI get good enough so we can build CCG decks with AI? Anyway,
yeah, I mean, well, that was actually kind of makes me wonder. Actually, if you fed a bunch of decks, you'd probably get garbage. But yeah,
you'll get something that looks like a deck.
I mean that would be the. This is getting off topic. Who'd have, who'd have
I mean,
thought? Yeah,
Meticulous Talks.
yeah. Like if you wanted to do that, you'd probably start with limited or something, right? You would want to build your decision engine to make the right choice given like a draft deck or pack or something, right? That feels like an easier problem to solve. Slightly easier.
It is slightly easier. The problem is that, well, okay, for sealed, I wanted to say that for sealed, you only have to consider the pool that you have, and maybe that makes it easier, but that's not true. Because when you build a deck, you still need to consider the entire pool because that's what other people might have gotten. And I think that's a large context that you need to keep in mind. And our even I mean, first of all, language model building decks is already kind of but they're also limited in limited in their context windows. So you can only give them so much information. And also, as a player, okay, this card has a really good effect, right? It's a like removal or something. Like you can't really, we it's so there's so much that goes into building a deck. Is
Yeah,
kind of like insane how much information you need to build a deck because you need to be aware of every other card. You need to know which effects are good, which effects are not as good, and figure out what your opponents might be playing, what color combinations are good in this particular format, and build against it or build those color combinations. It's just so much.
yeah. And like I was thinking not in terms of a language model, but more like a hand rolled, uh, machine learning system.
But it's still
But still,
it
yeah,
will still face similar challenges.
yeah, all right,
There's also if you're building a custom model, you need to what is the goal function of the model? To build a good deck, but what is a good deck?
yeah, Yeah.
The deck
Once
with highest tier rating.
once someone gets around to codifying the rule book and allowing us to build like a computer version of the game, then you can just have the AIs play each other and do adversarial learning.
Okay, but then you need to like okay, sure, you need to build the AI that plays the game, right?
Yeah.
And you do that through adversarial learning, sure. And then you use that AI to simulate games, and that's how you determine which decks are better. And then you have as many data points as you want because you can just instantly figure out which deck wins. There we go. This is the future. We have figured it out.
Well, it just comes down to, as I said, the eternal problem of being able to write a computer program to resolve the rules all the time.
I
Which I know
think,
is
uh, I think that's possible. It's certainly one of the hardest steps here. But like building a custom model to play in the game, that's also like years of research work.
yeah, yeah.
And then, yeah, but it'll be something really fun to do. Yeah, rules, digital rules engine would be a good thing for the game because it would let you, like, anyone could answer any rules questions they have. And if we have a digital version of the game, it makes it so much easier to get into the game because now you don't have to. You can actually have a game tutorial,
Mhm.
that somebody could play. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's for the future Meticulous Talks in like 2 years.
2 years. Oh, that's such
That's
ambition.
optimistic, yeah. Probably 5.
All right. So I have this challenges section down at the end here. Um, we already mentioned archetypes. I don't know if I want to like we just had our discussion about archetypes. Um, so the the other there's two other big ones. The first is not really a problem anymore, but was a problem at the start of doing TIA, which is that in order to kind of do it properly, you need to know for each tournament what deck everybody was playing, and also the outcomes of every individual match. Um, so, certainly, as I said, back when I started, there were quite a few tournaments that would get posted to Reddit that would just be the list of placements or their Swiss results, but no individual match record, right? Which I mean that makes sense. When you're posting on Reddit, you don't really have space to
Yeah.
do the individual Swiss bracket, whatever, right? Um, and so there are some algorithms that I use to kind of simulate um, tournaments like that, uh, where you take like the L numbers for the entire field, and you do an average, and then an average excluding the deck. So like, okay, maybe this is what the whiteboard would be good for. Like if you have like eight decks, for each one you compute an average excluding itself, because you obviously would never play against yourself in the tournament. Um, and so then each matchup is just against that sort of phantom average. Maybe I didn't need the whiteboard, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's that. Uh, yeah, less of a problem lately because most of the time Sim runs the tournament and they give me the full results. I appreciate them for to no end. Um, Other thing is, and this is the one that's been a uh, much more of an active area of study, is what to do, as we just mentioned, when someone brings a new cooked up thing to a tournament, right? What L number should a deck that the system has never seen before get assigned when it shows up at a tournament?
1?
So 1's a good number. I mean, that's assuming that the deck is average. That's a reasonable starting point. I think at some point when I first started out, I did that. But it's kind of like you would think, and this is kind of the sort of V2 that came onto that, right? If it was a Coco, say for example, like yes, 1. But if we're talking about like Continentals, you'd assume that like a deck that gets brought to Continentals should be better than average, right? Maybe.
Depends on the player.
Right. I mean that's the judgment, right? Like the second version of what I did was it started at 1, but then there would be like adjustments that would get put on that based on if it was a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 tournament, and also if it was like over a certain threshold of players. On the assumption that serious tournaments or large tournaments, people would take it a little bit more seriously and they would try to bring better than average decks. And like, yes, again, yeah, you can talk about players being good or moderately good, deck builders and such. Honestly, I'm actually gonna write that down. Because yeah, that's a fair adjustment to maybe make.
Maybe.
So anyway, what it does now is it infers the L based on the finishing position that deck had. Right? If it won the tournament, it must be pretty good, so we'll give it a high L. If it didn't do good in the tournament, it probably isn't that good, so we'll give it a lower.
So you estimate the L based on the result, and then you
Yeah.
go from there.
Yeah, and there's still like adjustments that get put in. Like so the estimated L ranges from 0.75 to 1.25. But there's also adjustments that go in there for the same reason, right? If we're at Continentals, it might range from like 0.75 to 1.4 or something like that. Where, yeah, like higher tiers and more people kind of make the ceiling go up a little bit and make like the spreads in the distribution, because this is like a I don't know if I want to get into the nuts and bolts of the math, but it's like there are 6, yes I am, there are 6 sort of levels that the algorithm uses, 6 sort of tiers, I guess, that start at 0.75, and then each step up is it's 0.05 in the base, but every like adjustment increases that step. So like up on the highest, if it's Continentals, every step is 0.1. You go 0.1. So at 0.75, 0.85, 0.9. No, wait a second. No. Yeah. It's 0.1 by default, and it's 0.15 if we're talking about a tier 3 tournament. That's right. Yeah. So I guess this is actually maybe worth writing down. Yeah, because it's 0.75, then 0.85. This would be much better with a tablet. Oh boy, yeah. 1.05, 1.15, 1.25. Right, and then for the bigger ones, it goes then, because it's 1.05, it goes to 0.9, and then 1.15, then 1.3. Wait. This isn't gonna work. Okay, I don't know. Clearly, I don't know the exact math, but it works out to like 1.45 at the top.
Fair enough. I mean, the sequence you were going with does end up with 1.45.
Well, it would be 1.45 at the second highest rank.
Mm,
I was gonna go over the top, right?
I see. Well, anyway, exact numbers I don't think matter
Yeah,
too much.
something like that. But there's an issue with this system too, right? And that is kind of as we saw with the results this year, right? The Allure and Twitch deck first showed up at HithCon, played by Fizzban, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't do very well. Because it's a hard deck to play, right? He was 0-3 with it.
Maybe.
Or maybe 1-3.
Was it the same deck?
I think it was.
Okay. Well, hold on. No. Fizz was not at HIFCon this year. I was like so confused.
Oh, okay.
Fizz never
Someone.
played
Okay.
Allure and Twitch.
Someone was playing it then. Was it Max?
It might have been. I don't know who it was. It was Dan. That's right.
Ah, okay. Sorry.
Dan is like very inexperienced.
Okay. I apologize for besmirching Fizz's good name.
Yeah, we besmirched Dan instead.
Um, yeah.
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 I think player played a lot of factor into this.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so the point of the matter is that, yeah, it had one tournament result on file, which was not particularly good, right? And so, like, the way the system had been, well, I shouldn't say had been, is implemented, is that it uses this inference if it's got nothing, but if it's got data on file, it uses that. And so, going into Continentals, the system was like, oh, this Grandpa's guy is such an idiot, he's playing a terrible deck. Yeah, it didn't give that deck any respect, despite the fact that it should, right? It's not actually that bad of a deck, right?
Yeah.
So, this is the thing I'm currently doing. The change I'm making is I mentioned we were going to do. Well, I talked about blending factors together. Now it's going to do a blended average, where at one end, when there's nothing on file, it does entirely inference based. And on the other end, it goes entirely based on past performance. But in the middle, it's some average between those two numbers, between the number that it would get from past performance and the number that it would infer based on that deck's performance in this current tournament. And it's based on sort of the number of games. So if it has like 4 games on file, then I think it's like 0.8 based on the current tournament and 0.2 based on past performance or something like that. And those numbers kind of scale. Yeah, the inference scales down and the past performance scales up as you go this direction.
Yeah, I think maybe the what's the word? Not function, but like idea that you should use is the more data points the deck has, the harder it is to change the L value, right? Because like one individual data, like when you have a lot of data points, one individual data point should change much less than in the beginning, when the deck has no data points.
Right, and that's how it works because the L is based purely on win rate, right?
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but then, why was that a problem with Allure and Twitch? Because like that was just one data point, and win rate was terrible. Sure, it was 0. But then,
well, so
the Continentals should have brought a lot more.
Yeah, it did, but like, the deck was given an L of 0.5, right?
Oh, you calculate L before you account for the results?
If
Why
there's
not? Why
if
not
there's
after?
well,
Shouldn't the win rate of the deck be like? Shouldn't L be part of L already by the time you see which deck won against which one?
hmm,
That would solve your problem with not having any data when the deck shows up at first. Like it's basically your inference model, right? Except you just use the result as is.
yeah, um, yeah, that does seem like kind of an obvious answer, doesn't it?
That's something to try.
Well, yeah, like this is feels a lot like I gave this lecture and someone, yeah, just asked, well, why don't you just do it that way? You look, hmm, yeah, probably should be doing it that way, shouldn't we? You get kind of deep in the weeds of your own thinking, um, and well, we've just always done it that way. But yeah,
Yeah,
does
I
make
mean,
sense,
maybe
doesn't it?
there are problems with the method I suggested. We never know.
Right.
Maybe there are some other issues that come up from including the deck win rate before. But yeah, I just don't. Yeah, I think it should be fine though to always
I
have
mean,
the L as the like. That's what tiebreakers for Swiss do, right? They account for the win rate that the deck has. Not before the before the Swiss it doesn't know, but like before the match that uh no, I'm talking nonsense. Never mind.
yeah, yeah, it is effectively, as you say, it is effectively doing what this whole algorithm I've just designed, formula or whatever. It's effectively just doing that. In fact, it's literally doing that, right? Yeah. If you take a deck with 3 games into continentals, all of those games, the 10 games you played today are going to overpower the 3 from yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Sometimes the math just works.
Yeah, and just taking the win rate does do the same thing, whereas like going from one data point to 2 data points could change a lot, but going from 100 to 101 probably will not change anything,
Yeah.
which is a good property, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it depends whether like maybe that should have also a time based drop off like with the like you have like maybe the I don't know if your current L value is calculated. It's not just pure win rate, right? Or you do
So
is it so the drop off that is it applied to the final score or is it applied to the L value of the deck?
it's
Or
a
how does that work actually?
it's applied to the final score.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it should be applied to the L value.
Yeah. So that wins from a long time ago don't count as much.
Yes.
Yeah. Like so technically, and this is the issue that I mentioned before. Technically, what the spreadsheet actually does is it has all the win rates stacked up on top of each other, and then it has a rank function for each one, right, from top to bottom, and then there's a little bit of math. It basically says, based on how many ranks we've got, figure out what step is required to go from 0.5 up to 1.5, and then do that, right? So at the top is 1.5, the bottom is 0.5, and everything else is distributed in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Now, the reason that's an issue is because if the median win rate is not 50%, then the middle of that distribution is not going to be 1, right? If the median win rate is like slightly above 50%, then L of 1 is going to be slightly above 50%.
Interesting. Is that a bad thing?
It's there's a legitimate question to that's a very legitimate question to ask, but it does mean that sort of the assumption I made at the start, right, where I said, the average deck has an L of 1, that assumption is not always correct, right?
Sure. Okay. So I think okay. Maybe you do the IQ thing, right? Where one is defined as the median. Uh, so like you basically readjust your scale of win rates based on the what the median is, the high end is, and the low end is, right? You could do that. Then the scores will change between tournament results, like the absolute values of the scores will change, which is might not be a thing that you want to happen, right? Alternatively, yeah, that's what you could do. But I'm not sure if that it's a bad thing that median is not always one. It just means that if the median is above one, that means on average, decks will have a little higher absolute scores, right? And if the median is below one, then they on average will have a little less absolute scores. But really, we only care about relative positions between decks, right? Absolute numbers don't really matter that much, as far as I can see, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
It's like I don't care if the first deck has 300 points or 400 points. The number is meaningless. uh, it doesn't mean anything. I only care that like okay, top two decks are like 399 and 400, and the third deck is like 300. Like only the relatives matter here. I think.
Hmm. That's an interesting question. Like, because that implies I ought to make some changes to the way that I present the data.
Well, I mean, the number is still like nice. Well, again, you present the data through numbers, but like the distance between decks is also matters, right? If I see that one deck is like close to another one, but slightly below, like that's different from a deck being far apart below. So distance matters. That's why numbers matter. But if you give me a deck, just one deck, regarding any other deck, and you tell me, okay, it has 100 tier score, that tells me absolutely nothing, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's a fair point. Like, yeah, this is a matter again for the long future. Like, one of the things that I wanted to do even after I got the API stood up is have a TIA front end that presents the data nicely. And like, you know if the relative scores matter but the absolute score doesn't, that tells me it should be a chart. Right? You want to
Maybe,
visualize the
yeah.
gaps rather than get the actual numbers.
Yeah. I think that would make sense. Charts would work. That's what I know how much you know about WoW, but like whenever an expansion or a patch releases, people usually compare the like damage per second of every class, or every specialization rather, because like people usually want to play the best things that's out there and like that does the most damage for DPS at least classes. And the way that's usually presented is a chart because absolute numbers don't matter. People only care about relative stuff. Like if this spec is a little worse than the other spec, okay, that's fine. If the spec is a lot worse than the best spec, then that's a different story.
Right.
So for decks, I don't see why that would be different.
Okay. Good ideas. All right. Well, that's the end of my notes.
Yeah, I mean, we've been here for a while.
Yeah, always good to get content. I hope.
For the content.
Yeah, I hope this has been somewhat educational and also somewhat entertaining. That would be the good measure. Um, any other questions from you, Hithrock? Or from the chat?
Nope.
In the meantime, yeah, as we covered at the start of the stream, uh, there won't be a stream 2 weeks from now. That's Canadian holiday. Our next stream is going to be October 26th. Yeah, it's the 12th is the next one. Yeah. So October 26th. Given all the time we'll have to prepare, I think we'll have something together. We have some ideas in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I said drought, but we do have some ideas.
Otherwise, thank you all very much for coming out and watching, either here or on YouTube later. Thanks for listening to my TED Talk. I have been Cursor Chords.
And I've been Hifrock.
And we'll see you in October.
Bye.